Hello, and a very warm welcome to my YouTube this evening. This is really part two of the story of the walrus, and interestingly, it was the Australians that originally specified a design for this amphibian flying boat, because they were taking out survey work on the Great Barrier Reef to start with. And along these lines came the Seagull 3, which you'll see in the pictures there. And this was, between 1926 and 1929, and they had several Seagull 3s out there. Eventually, they were replaced by the Seagull 5, which in effect was the Walrus. And of course, the Walrus. Well, they were both all-metal hulls. The Walrus had the Bristol Pegasus 9-cylinder radial, which turned out 775 horsepower. And in 1935, the Royal Australian Air Force ordered 24 Seagulls. And, of course, they were manufactured at the Woolston Works in Southampton. They were then dismantled and shipped out to Australia.
The Walrus, a supermarine production, was designed for fleet spotting. It was the first amphibian to be catapulted with a full warload and was generally adopted by the Admiralty for the Fleet Air Arm. The Australian Air Force also used it considerably, and with this service it was known as the Seagull 5. It had a Bristol Pegasus air-cooled engine driving a pusher air screw.
The crane is then trained over the ship's side and the jib lowered to the correct radius for aircraft recovery. The quick-release coupling is now lowered to the correct height for the hooker-on to reach it. The quick-release coupling is supported by tricing wires from a winch in the form of a fluid flywheel. The crane operator adjusts this winch so that the quick-release coupling is stationary and balanced. The hooker-on can now haul down the coupling and overcome the winch with very little effort. When ready, the officer concerned reports to the captain that the boom is ready for recovery. The directing officer reports that the crane, catapult, and seaplane recovery party are ready for recovery. The captain can now recover the aircraft when he wishes. He orders the amount of helm, which has been found in practice to give the best slick for his ship, to swing the bows of the ship through the direction from which the wind is blowing. The signal close-up indicates to the aircraft the wheel being put over. This is the executive signal to the pilot that he may select the best moment for landing in the calm patch made by the slick. The signal is hauled down when the ship's head passes through the direction of the wind. The aircraft is approaching the smooth patch of water, in this case in comparatively calm seas. The pilot must be practiced in this approach so as to cause the least possible delay in recovery. He's coming in, flying slowly and using his engine. He flies low over the water until he selects the right spot in the slick for his final tail-down alighting. He taxis up to the tow while one of his crew prepares to hook onto the crane.
Recovery of aircraft was always a problem when the parent vessel was underway. This Walrus is trying out a new scheme. The idea was, as you see, for a member of the crew to pick up a towed line so that the machine could be towed at the same speed as the ship, and thereby making it easier for the crane to hook on and hoist inboard. Rough seas restricted the activities of the Fleet Air Arm, and for this reason the flying boat type of aircraft was finally adopted for vessels other than carriers as proving the more seaworthy than the float type. Even then, heavy seas were a considerable contention. And later, during the approaching war, catapults were removed from all warships. One idea to help landing was to provide a lee by turning the ship's head into wind and then swinging the stern towards the wind away from the spot the aircraft intended to land, thereby creating a smooth patch of water called a slick.
In very rough weather, when the aircraft cannot taxi fast enough or caravans are running, the ship will have to complete a 360-degree turn after making a slick to come alongside the aircraft from astern. As soon as the aircraft alights, the speed of the ship is adjusted to allow the pilot to taxi up to the tow at a reasonable speed without possibility of overshooting owing to the tractive force of his engine. The course of the ship is steadied with the wind about 30 degrees on the port bow to give sufficient lee without causing indraft. The hooker-on is secured by a safety belt and is ready on the center section. The observer or passenger stands by to hook on the aircraft towing pennant with a spring hook on the towing hawser. If it were very rough, he would use the side window. The pilot throttles back slowly after hooking on, and he must continue to steer and control his aircraft until it is hoisted clear of the water. The tow should be adjusted so that the aircraft tows under the crane. The hooker-on hauls down on the coupling, he hooks on and holds up his hand. A pull is now put on the tricing wires to hold the aircraft under the crane, and the hooker-on removes the pin of the coupling in case it is necessary to slip at short notice. The directing officer orders mate and hoist. This prevents the aircraft dropping back into a trough of a wave, while the spring takes up slack in the purchase if the aircraft rises on a wave. The pilot stops his engine and the hooker-on replaces the pin. He then unhooks the 3 steadying lines and passes them to the pilot and observer, who hook them onto the aircraft handling lines. At a sign from the directing officer, the pilot in the cockpit slips the tow from a release in the bow of the aircraft. As soon as the aircraft is under control of the wing-tip steadying lines, the hoisting is continued. The aircraft should be steadied with the nose towards the crane. The handling party take rendering turns over cleats in appropriate positions. They must keep the aircraft steady, nose to crane. If necessary, the second tail handling line may now be released by the pilot for further steadying. As soon as the aircraft is over the deck, the crew release 2 wire martingales from which a steadying tackle is bowsed down to a jackstay, led across the deck to the loading-on position. The crane is trained, and the friction on the shackle gives considerable steadying effect. Aircraft ratings release and extend the aircraft retractable spool fitting and fit stirrup links onto them. Detailed ratings of the handling party hook tackles onto the stirrup links to take over control of the aircraft. The tackle under the hull may now be unhooked and the loading legs erected for loading aircraft. If amphibian loading gear was not in use, the catapult trolley would be traversed into the loading-on position at this juncture. The aircraft spools can be finally guided into the loading legs by hauling down on the positioning tackles, the pennants of which are passed over hooks on the stirrup links. The nose trimming gear is attached as soon as the spools are steadied in the loading legs. The directing officer lowers purchase at creep speed until the legs have the weight of the aircraft. Top bearing caps are then put on and secured. The nose gear is trimmed to a marked position. The purchase can then be unhooked. The trolley is now brought onto the stops at the base of the loading gear, the last few inches slowly to avoid undue shock. The front jaws of the trolley automatically take the catapult spools. The aircraft is trimmed to engage the rear spools. The top bearing caps are removed and the weight taken off the lower bearings. The legs are then collapsed and the loading gear removed. Meanwhile, steadying gear has been stowed away by the aircraft ratings and handling party. If the aircraft is to be stowed, the standard securing gear is put on by the aircraft ratings. This has shown the operation of steadying aircraft in rough weather. Some of the gear used could be dispensed with as considered desirable in calm weather. This is also dependent upon the wingtip clearances in the loading-on space. These are some correct landings in rougher weather. Notice the technique. He brings the aircraft in slowly and flies it onto the water with the tail down and using plenty of engine. Then, using the minimum of power necessary, he flies a few feet above the tops of the waves until a spot for landing is selected. He then throttles right back, holds off as long as possible, and makes a fully stalled landing from about 6 feet. He is prepared to give a good burst of engine to ease the aircraft down if it bounces. Notice that the tail of the aircraft touches the water first, and the landing is as smooth as could be expected. amphibian aircraft can land safely in rougher seas than floatplane types.
I had so much feedback from my first film about the Walrus, and many people remarked about building the Airfix kit, and so I thought it would be quite interesting to take a look at the construction of the Airfix kit that so many of you modelers had put together all those years ago. Of course, it's still a very popular kit and still available from Airfix, and I think it's really interesting just to take a look at this and see what's involved with putting the kit together. How it's very highly rated by modelers, and it's just an interesting thing to take a look at and see how it all goes together, and what the aircraft looks like when it's finished. I think it looks really, really good. Now, as time went along, Supermarine developed the Supermarine Sea Otter, which was instead of a pusher engine, it was a switch the other way around. It was pulling, and slightly more powerful, supposed to be have a greater range and more carrying capacity. It in fact just ran alongside the Walrus, and they both did great service together. But this next clip is, I think, is a very interesting example of a radio control model that was put together by Noel Hunt. I think you'll really enjoy this little clip.
Alrighty, here we go. Ready, Al?
Yep.
Ready, Jim? Yep. That's it. Didn't hurt too bad, did it?
I want to do that one more time. Yeah, I zoomed out on that one because I was trying to do the thing you were telling me yesterday.
Same thing. I'll try it.
I really hope you enjoyed this short film about the walrus and the Supermarine Sea Otter. It was quite interesting that the walrus was still flying right up into the sort of mid-1960s in Australia, doing charter work and taking passengers on pleasure flights. But they still got them in the. They've moved them into the museum now, and we've also very fortunate that in the UK we've got 2 examples in the museum over here. Well, I hope you enjoyed it, and take the greatest care. Cheers for now.